We reached our 40, yeah,
Oh.
our 40-minute limit.
Oh, okay. I think it just started again.
Yeah.
Okay. Originally when I do those, the ones that you're seeing were usually about 24 by 17 or 18 inches. But I always make high-res scans of them with the printer, and then we make large-scale versions of the ones that I select. But they're all one of a kind. I don't reproduce, like I've had people say, well, could I buy that? And I say, well, it's already sold. And they say, well, can't you just print it again? And I say, sure, I could, but I don't want to. So they're one of a kind. And my gallerists love the fact because they can charge more money for them that way. So, but it's something I choose to do that as one of a kind. But so you can see there's flower images, there's facial images. Those black horizontals that you see are basically third generation of images that had 40 images, all in that were compressed images. So there's a lot of imagery stacked and layered throughout my work. When I do the oil enamel paintings on aluminum, which I wish I would have prepared a little more, I could have shown you how those are more coming from this source, but I edit to where it's very minimal, dealing with just some of the pixelation forms off some of the faces like you see that are printed over some of these. So, but anyway, they're layered images, and when you see these in person, you really can see some of the images appearing even in the black that you lose on the screen. And it's amazing when you see them in person because they're really different. You can, when you lean to the left or right, you see some of the images bleeding through some of the other colors. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when I have maybe when I've run it through the printer 3 times and the ink's still wet, I've been finding that I pour bleach on them and water, and it's really opening up the work to a whole new series that I'm not showing yet, that I think is going to be pretty fascinating. The bleach really will, I have to stop it before it eats into the paper, but I want it to be on the ink enough to where it begins to loosen the ink and they become looking like watercolors. So that's something I'm playing with for the future.
John, I'm curious how your gallery felt about you doing this show, since they like the fact that you tend to only do one.
He did not like the idea. He said to me, well, that goes against everything you always say, and this is why I charge more. And I said, well, I created 6 pieces specifically for this show, and these were for this show. And so I'm making allowances for just these 6. And after this, I will go back to them being one of a kind.
So get them while you can, right?
This is very true. Like this one with the blue face, that, like I said, I have created another one where I took it 2 more steps and printed more imagery on top of it. And so when are they finished? There's a fine line where it becomes mud and just too much. You have to learn when to stop. And sometimes I don't stop soon enough. And sometimes I stop too early. Like this one, I've gone on to keep working with it and it's a whole new picture. So endless conclusion. There's a line that's been very inspirational to me. It's from a song by Death Cab for Cutie, where they say there is a beauty in a failure, there's depth beyond compare. And I love the idea of failure becoming something beautiful by printing glitches on top of images, breaking down the images text code. These are all things I work with. And then I also work with oil enamel paint, and where I create stencils off of these forms that you see in the prints. And use the stencils to put layers of oil enamel one on top of another. So that sort of sums up a little bit of my work practice.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's a great segue into Stephen's turn. So, Maine, take it away.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. This is the benefit of being last is that I get to look back and see patterns, and I'm really interested in what Alicia's been saying about scale. This whole issue of scale is really important. Some of us have been talking about layering, and that's kind of a natural, I guess, with Photoshop, which is kind of built that way. What I'd like to do is start with just a few, well, two images of my real work. You'll forgive me for putting it that way. My real paintings. This is about 50 by 40 inches. It's acrylic on canvas. This is considerably smaller. It's about 30 inches high, also acrylic on canvas. And if you are detecting what you think is the evidence of a print, contact of a relief plate on the surface, you would be correct. This is an example of a work in progress. This is in my Brooklyn studio from a few years ago. This is a 50 by 40 format, not the same painting, but a different painting. But what you're looking at is a piece of, in the foreground, a piece of stretched duck with gesso and some color on it. And it's sitting on an apparatus, a contraption that is hinged at the middle. And then the second part in the background is the plate that I'm using to, I'll say ink up. It's not ink, it's acrylic paint, but slather paint on that and flip it over and make an impression. Let it dry, do it again, let it dry, do it again, let it dry, do it again. And then either eventually, John, I hear you about ruining things. Eventually they're either ruined or which I like to think is a learning experience. Maybe it is, I don't know. At a certain point I go, yes, this is it. We're there. Time for dinner. This is a slightly bigger version of the same well, it's a slightly bigger contraption. This is a painting in progress that's about 80 by 60 inches, which I've artfully propped up so you can see the hinge, read that a little bit better. This is bigger still. This is 100 by 80 inches. So the fundamental procedural paradigm is relief printmaking on canvas with a super crude setup. I use literally a paint roller, wall paint roller, to slather this plate with. The plate, by the way, usually begins with a piece of styrofoam, extruded foam, the rigid stuff. Sometimes plywood, but that gets to be kind of heavy. So I start with styrofoam and then I gouge into it. You see quite a bit of gouging here in this plate. You also might see some building up with mediums and plaster and stuff like that. I paint this way because I'm really not that interested in composition. I really want to be involved with color. I am involved with color and surface. I'll go back to this one for that surface business going on there. Color and surface, the difference between a transparent color and opaque color, which is a huge thing. It's like the fourth dimension of color, I think. So the composition as such is leaning toward arbitrary. I used to say that if I could get like a gang of chimpanzees with clubs to come into my studio and pound on the styrofoam for 10 minutes, and then they could go away, and I'd be happy with printing up that plate. I'm not sure that's true anymore. There's a little bit of composition creeping in lately, but it is still largely arbitrary. I was playing with this, I was playing with this magic eraser tool in Photoshop, which is magic as advertised. Working with, this is a work on paper that I did in the same way. It's much smaller than the paintings I was showing you, but it's a work on paper that I produced in the same way with a textured plate. And in Photoshop, I realized one fine day, I realized that I could erase everything that wasn't applicable to what I was thinking of at the moment, and sort of extract, that's the word I wanted to use, extract these kinds of compositions, or they become overlays really, from works on paper, or from paintings on paper or on canvas of various sizes. And they're kind of equalized in scale, equalized in size on my screen. And then I just began to kind of play with recombining them. I don't think this one is in the show. I did about 300 of these, kind of typical of sometimes of how I work, where I kind of get a little, go overboard and get kind of lost with a new technique. And so I did a whole bunch of these, as John mentioned earlier. I was posting one a day for a couple months, maybe more. But there are very many more than what I posted. But these are, this and the next one, this is the last image. These are these are recombinations of these, of impressions, configurations that I've extracted from the paintings and from the work on paper. And it was a very non-directed play kind of thing that I was doing. I can't really tie it into COVID. Yes, I did these when I was, when we were, several months, I guess 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, maybe 3 months into the pandemic. And I found it difficult to work in the studio, with everything. But I'm not sure that I wouldn't have done this even if it hadn't been for COVID. It was really more like discovering what the layering function of Photoshop enabled me to do with these things that I had extracted from the physical work. So I guess for me, the kind of funny thing, is it ironic? I don't know if it's ironic or not, but the way that I make these is, with this, I'll say it again, intentionally crude, intentionally like caveman printmaking here, we're bringing the data into Photoshop enables me to recombine in ways that I would not be able to do. It's not that it's easier or quicker or faster. It's something that I wouldn't be able to do. It's also the stakes are a little lower. Maybe I'll be a little provocative here. I sort of feel like I have less at stake in the digital work because I can swap in and swap out. It's very, very flexible procedurally. Whereas with this painting, I mean, you can imagine maybe, you have to mix up a pot of paint and spend some time and some physical energy producing these paintings. And I tend to have more emotionally at stake. I guess I can say that I believe in them a bit more. I certainly have more skin in the game, to put it that way, than I do with the digital. As much as I love the digital work, and we can talk, maybe another topic would be how is this work kind of in what ways has it fed back into the other work the physical work that we do. That's, I think, one of Mac's questions, or maybe John, that was one of your questions. But I will say that I have a really different relationship to this body of work than I do to the paintings. And the first sort of snarky thing I said was I wanted to show you my real work, and I guess I have to admit that's how I think of it. Like the other acrylic on canvas. That's the roll up your sleeves, brew a pot of coffee kind of work. And the digital is a side show. But sometimes those side shows, those side projects can be super productive too, I found, for me. So that's all I'm going to say about that right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to add that you were the first artist that John sort of brought up as we were talking about, what could we do with something that is online and work that's made to be online. And he was like, oh, I know this artist who's, he's like playing with this stuff and it's not his main practice, but I think it could be this really interesting way of kind of coming around to it. And elevating something that's practice oriented and turning it into something else. Yeah.
John very sweetly, kindly made some prints for me. I think you mentioned that earlier in the introduction. And he said, he asked me if he kind of surprised me a little bit. But they arrived one day and I was knocked out, I mean, to go from screen size to even twice screen size printed was a huge leap, I mean, the issue of scale is really enormous. And that was that's when I got excited about this. Became something different for me. Yeah.
Okay, Steve, thank you so much, Stephen. That was wonderful. I want to jump in too and just say that it's a really exciting proposition for Equity Gallery to then, this idea led us to opening a print shop on our online marketplace, and which it becomes this exciting way to bring in emerging collectors or sort of younger collectors that are just starting to, we're massaging and sort of bringing into the idea about being collectors, and for them to do it at a price point that was accessible. And I think that really fit in really well with Equity's egalitarian mission. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Max Holbert next. And Max has been working with multiples, digital authorship in the digital space for a real long time. And now works for Art Authority. And what they do is they partner with artists, other arts organizations and museums with software solutions and multiples to sort of make great art accessible to a wider group of collectors. So, and Mac is going to lead a panel. We're going to throw out some questions. And for those that joined a little bit later, you can load your questions into the chat, and we'll do a little Q&A after we've done some work with the panel. So fire your questions in there and we'll read them out loud before we end the evening. Okay, Max, take it away and tell us all about yourself. We really want to hear from you first.
You have several hours?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I was a art major at the University of California way back when. I was a pioneer student at University of California in Santa Cruz. I was also part of a group that was led by an artist from New York named Robert Watts, and we did a lot of work in the Fluxus art movement. I got involved in this digital realm kind of a very strange way, which was, you have to excuse me, we've been sucking smoke here for the past month or so my voice is a little cracking here. I got involved because I was out of college. I got involved in the world of rock and roll. I got hired by a management company in Hollywood to put together tours. And one of the things you do with the tour is you have to create a budget. And in those days, it was a piece of paper and a pen and an eraser and some whiteout. And, we would go and I would do these very complicated, we'd have, say, 30 people on the road, very complicated spreadsheet on paper by hand. And somebody would come in and say, well, so-and-so wants to have another roadie on the road for him. So I'd have to go back and by hand change everything. And a friend of mine who was also a road manager came in one day and says, I got to show you this. And he pulled the computer out of his car with a program which was a digital spreadsheet, and it absolutely changed my life. I started to utilize the tools. I had a very early Mac and started to use the tools to create the itineraries for the tours, which were usually before digital, they were just a stapled bunch of probably 15 to 30 pages that outlined exactly where you were going, what hotel you were going to stay in, what was the number at the venue you're going to be playing in. And so what I started to do with these digital tools was I started to actually create little books, and I would put little covers on them. And I would scan images utilizing a very early type of scanner, which was a little device that you put in your StyleWriter printer. You replaced the ink cartridge and you rolled the piece of paper into it, and that had the image that you wanted to capture. and it would just zip back and forth, take forever, but you got this amazing scan. That interested one of the people in the group I was working for, which was a group called Crosby, Stills and Nash. And we started to fool around trying to scan in photographs. And we did that for about 3 or 4 months. And then we realized, how are we going to get these out of the computer? And so we started to investigate different ways of outputting these digital images. We tried wax thermal, we tried everything that was out there at the point, and none of them really had any sort of artistic kind of quality associated with them. We ended up at UCLA. There was a little print facility there using early Fuji color printers. And that was a lot better. They were able to print on kind of almost art paper. And that was fine for about 6 months. And then one day we went in and they were closing their facility. So we found out about a company in Boston or outside of Boston called Iris, and they were making a machine. We were talking about expensive printers. These machines were $126,000 a piece. So my partner, Nash, bought one. And we took it apart. We cut the heads off of it, voiding the warranty within the first week that we had the machine, so that we could put thicker papers into it, because it was made to print on very slick, very thin paper for proofing in the color printing industry. So we created our own version of it, which we took the lid off of it. We installed a vacuum line to suck off the excess ink, and we started making fine art digital prints. We had a lot of resistance at the very beginning. I remember 1992 going to a show in LA to show some of my prints. And I was sitting there one night, and a crusty old photographer walked in with an old beat up Leica around his neck. And he sat there looking at my prints on the wall. And I walked up to him and I said, "So what do you think?" He says, "Well, you know what? Those are the most beautiful prints I think I've ever seen. How do you do that?" And so I said, "Well, you scan." And a second I said the word digital, the guy completely shut down, turned around, spit on me and said, "You're destroying photography," and walked away. And that was in 1992. Things have definitely changed for the good. So I was able to spend 18 years in Los Angeles, mainly working with artists and photographers. I had got to work with David Hockney. It was very interesting because the first thing that Hockney said when he came in is, can I print something and then put it back in the printer and print again? Can I take the RGB and print the red channel first and then the green channel on top of that and then the blue channel? And he was experimenting very much the same way as John is, which is great to see people screwing with the technology. I love it, pushing it. So anyway, I've been doing this since the late 80s, early 90s, and if there's any questions that anybody has about anything that has to do with the development of digital printmaking, I'd be happy to talk about it. I think for me, I think one of the important things that an artist has to do is he has to get his work out. And that's one of the problems about doing, one-offs. And I think that being able to create multiples is a wonderful way to get your work out to other people so that you can share your art with other people. I've had a lot of resistance on the part of galleries over the years saying, well, you're going to ruin your market and all of that. But I don't think that the 600,000 postcards of sunflowers has hurt the value of Van Gogh's at all. So I think that it's an important thing. If people want to buy the original, they're free to buy the original, and they may want to do that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with creating something that's beautiful and something that allows them to enjoy your art. So anyway. So I think that's enough of an introduction for me, Michael. So I think we should probably move on and pose some questions.
Yeah,
you're off. Oh, there you are.
Pose a couple of questions. That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So have any of you, of the artists involved here, have any of you faced resistance on the part of your world in terms of talking about digital?
I would love to answer that one. I laughed when I read it on your sheet of questions because I realized back probably the year 1999 or 2000, I had a show in Houston, and the dealer refused to show the digital pieces along with the paintings. And she was very upset and said they weren't archival and all kinds of stuff. And the funny thing was, 2 years later, I was offered a show at the Dallas Museum of Fine Arts, and I produced my first 6 foot, 7 foot digital versions of things related to the oil paintings. And we showed like 6 large scale paintings and 6 large scale digital disruptions. And she changed her mind after she saw the show in the museum.
After a few of them sold, probably, right?
Yes, we sold everything. So yeah, there was early resistance when I first started in the late 90s. Definitely.
Well, to be honest, in the early days of digital, I remember one day walking out of the studio, and we had a black and white print of a musician. We threw it on the table outside, went out to lunch. And my partner had thrown a newspaper over half of it just by accident. And we came back from lunch about 2.5 hours later, and you could definitely see where the sun had bleached part of the image. So there was a lot of problems with, the fugitive nature of early digital prints. But we quickly dealt with that. And now the prints that we're making at Art Authority, 1,000 museums, are 200 years for an RGB image, a color image, and 400 years for a black and white image. So we've really dealt with that. Not that any of us are going to be around in 100 years, but it's nice to know that the art may exist. So anybody else have any stories of early resistance to the digital?
Not resistance so much, but I do recall around the same time that John was doing that particular exhibition, I was in undergrad, and we had had just gotten our first digital camera that could take a zip drive.
And Sony.
Yeah, and so you had to check that out from the equipment library, and we did have a large scale printer at the school I was at, but everything was relegated to the graphic design and illustration department. So getting access to that, I had to go in as a painter taking the graphic design courses to be able to use the equipment, and it really made for a strange experience, and I wish I'd kept more of the pieces. I still have the files, but I don't have very many of the original prints from that time period anymore.
Right. Interesting. All right. So any other questions about that, or any other observations on that? So let me ask you this: what aspects of the digital output most intrigue you? What does it allow you to do that you could never do before?
Well, I'll jump in there. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important to look at these digital tools as new paintbrushes. These are new tools. That's all they are. I remember doing a panel once, and a German professor stood up and he said, I don't like digital because, especially the cameras, because all you do is go click, 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 click. And I said, well, there's a real easy solution to that. And he says, what is that? And I says, don't do that. The point is that there are upsides and downsides of any new technology. And you have to find out how you can incorporate it into what you do, but it's just a new paintbrush. So go ahead, Stephen.
Well, I was going to say that, the issue of, I have a little bit to say about the resistance to digital, and it's not so much a resistance, I guess, but painting is a surface. Before it's anything else, it's a surface, and it remains a surface throughout its lifespan. When I'm working digitally, I'm very aware, because how can you not be, that it's a surfaceless image. It has no physical reality at all until it's printed out. And I'm really interested in hearing John's description of the overprinting. I would think that that would begin to give you some kind of a subtle kind of surface variations, like screen printing can do, I think, like a multiple print, screen print.
Well, the substrate that you choose to print on can also do that. I mean, over the years, I have printed on wood, I've printed on muslin, I've printed on silk, different types of paper, lots of Japanese washi papers.
Right. I
So
suppose
that can really add a lot to what it is you're doing. So you really have to look at working on your piece digitally. The final expression is the print.
Well, I think just to piggyback on that, like when I had put together the portfolio for Stephen of the works that I'd pulled from social media, the original set that I did was all on glossy paper. And as soon as I printed those out, I was just like, oh shit, these aren't quite right.
Exactly.
The blacks looked good, but they just weren't sitting right on the surface. Right. So I went back through with I think it was a matte paper, a much thicker matte paper. And so it just kind of drank the ink up, but still got like a really satiny black that had a totally different depth to it. And it makes all the difference in the world. And we thought about addressing that with this exhibition, but thinking about the prints, we just had so much going on, and we were like, we'll pocket this for another time. But yeah, I'm trying to think of how to address this, because I wholeheartedly agree with Stephen that it is looking at the screen, especially coming at it from a painter's standpoint. And I was reading this recently, where there's the idea that paintings used to be a window. And so we would look at paintings as being a window into this other space, and to a certain extent that's shifted a lot within my generation, watching us, sort of grow up with computers. And I mean, my daughter spends God knows how many hours on her screens these days. I mean, I do too, between being on a computer for work, watching TV at home, being on my iPad on the train, like all of these screens that we're looking sort of through. And so I think that's a bit more of what passes through my mind, and maybe what Stephen's getting at is there's this very weird digital realm. And if you just think of the work as being purely digital, it does remove it quite far from the final product that would be the print. And so I think having to enter into it, thinking about the print as the final aspect of it, maybe wasn't initially what we used as the stepping off point for this exhibition.
It could be good with experience. I'll anticipate what the tactility of a particular substrate is going to be. I appreciate that. I do think that it's in the making of a painting, the application of the pigment is a tactile experience. I mean, the tactility of the painting is built into the experience of painting. It's different. Yeah. It's just a different thing.
I think that one thing that a lot of people don't understand, being a fine art printmaker, is it's a translation. It's not just taking your file and loading it into the printer and sending it to the printer. It's your ability to really foresee and to pre-visualize what it's going to be. When I'm working on a image that I'm going to be putting on a very tissue thin Gampi paper, which is a Japanese washi paper, I'm thinking about that the whole time I'm working on it and getting it ready to send out to the printer. So that's a very important part of printmaking.
Yeah, in my work, I'm always thinking in terms of the vernacular of the screen. And so I always do my prints on super glossy paper to mimic that. And that's also why in my paintings, I use oil enamel on aluminum, because the aluminum doesn't absorb the gloss, the polyurethane that's in the oil enamel. Mm-hmm. And again, for me, it's because I want that vernacular language of the screen to be reflective in my work.
Right. Right, that's great.
I just want to throw in just a quick idea here about this idea of tactile and materiality that Stephen's been talking to, and about this idea of substrates, and how the whole market of art and how people are viewing art, what I hope we would talk to tonight, has really shifted to, they are experiencing, they're not thinking really about what's this going to look like when I print it out, or what does it look like? I mean, they're purchasing and experiencing and spending lots of time in viewing rooms. And I've done better sometimes in shows, which like struck me as being really extraordinary this year. And in, you know, pre-COVID, after COVID, even when we opened up, that some shows would do better online than actually have the work was on the walls and in the marketplace. And I sold a lot more. It's just a thought that.
So you sold them as digital images?
You're not selling, no, it doesn't make the difference. If people know they're going to get the artwork, but they're experiencing it as a digital presence. You know what I'm trying to say? It's a very different experience. And you know, they get shipped the work, right? But they haven't experienced it as tactile. They haven't experienced it as Alicia talked about, like getting around the edge. They've experienced this flat screen and they purchase. And
Yeah.
I can tell you the kind that, and I'll shut up, I don't think you should talk about it.
Right.
Duotone is what often sells most. Like work that has a lot of chiaroscuro, right? Sort of, you know, that sort of a real
Light and
push and
dark.
pull with tone is
Mhm.
what sells first, because it's what pops in this.
Well, you have a much greater Dmax on a screen than you do on a piece of paper. Your contrast ratio is much greater on the screen than on paper. That's part of the translation, you know, it really is. But I would say that my experience has been that people that view and purchase a print online are more than often really surprised about how beautiful the print looks.
Well, this was something that John and I talked about a lot as we were discussing, you know, what is the show? Is there a final product? And at one point we were saying, you know, maybe we just let people download the image and print it themselves. And then they take a certain kind of, not even just ownership, but it's almost like they are then making a new piece of art, because everyone's going to have a different printer, and some people are going to do these beautiful prints, and some people are going to, you know, use their old crappy printer. And we were intrigued by that idea, getting back to this, like, where are we? And the internet is often just seen as a marketplace, as, you know, I'm up late and I'm bored, and so I'm shopping. And I think what you were saying, Michael, about sometimes shows doing better when the works were sold online, even though they were going to get it shipped to them. It's the mindset that people come to the space with, and we wanted to address that, but also find a way to bridge those two spaces.
What
Well,
was
you know,
intriguing for me, let me finish. What intriguing for me is the idea that the show really was about creating work for that experience.
Mhm.
That for me was an extraordinary jump. That you were saying, okay, we understand that people are looking at art and buying art online. Can we make work specifically for that experience? I think it's a very new idea and a very exciting idea. That then the next jump for me, Alicia, is what you're saying. How do they then acquire the work? Like, and now you're at the NFT thing.
How do they
We talked about doing an NFT as well, and both like, no.
How do they emulate what you saw on your screen as an artist? You know, the problem with digital imagery is calibration of screens. You know, it's amazing the difference. I mean, if you go online and look up a famous painting and go and look at all the different ways that it's represented by different sites, you'll see, you know, 30 different images. You know, and that's, you know, you really cannot expect people to have a calibrated monitor to emulate exactly what you were seeing on your screen. So,
right.
Real issue.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, you know, in awareness of that, you know, made imagery that had very stark contrast. And because even if the color isn't going to be exactly what we'd intended it, you know, something that's light versus something that's dark is going to translate. And it was, and thinking about size, like how much contrast do you need for it to still read when it's really tiny versus very big. And I think that gets back into how it's interesting to think about how big can it go, you know, through the printing process. And, you know, John Pomara takes it to that other level with his really, you know, large scale ones.
Well,
maybe we should do that next, Michael. Large scale prints of all stuff.
There is new software available which uses artificial intelligence to up-res painting, digital paintings and digital photographs, that's absolutely astounding. I can take a very small JPEG, blow it up 5 times its size, and it looks better than the original JPEG. Just astounding. So that can happen. The only thing I worry about is, I remember a handout that I used to give to my students when I was teaching workshops called Big and Boring. And it was all about how people love to do large prints now. And I've been to many shows and I've seen a lot of large prints. Some of them are great large. A lot of them are not. They're large in content and large in size, but weak in content,
Well, that's,
So I think, excuse me?
That's a funny stepping off point, because the running joke when I was in undergrad was that, the 2 suggestions you'd always get was make it bigger or make 100 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that kind of ties back into the multiples thing, which Stephen had touched on a bit, and Amy showed really well in her presentation. I had dozens of these images, and I think, I'm forgetting exactly how you put it, Stephen, but it was really, really well said about, like, it's not, the stakes are lower. The stakes are a lot lower between the digital and the physical, because when I do one of my paintings, if I put the color down, I've maybe got 10 minutes before it starts to set, because it's acrylic, and I have to bust ass to get some water and sponges and clean it up and hopefully not make too much of a mess or destroy the layers that are underneath it as well. Whereas when I'm working digitally, all I have to do is hit Control Z, and that layer that didn't look the way I wanted it to is gone, or I can pull it back, or I can save that iteration of it and return to it at a later date. And I think that's one of those things that I found really liberating about working digitally, is that the labor that goes into making the paintings is so much more reduced. And not that I'm not thinking about the process differently. I mean, I sort of am, because I'm thinking about, well, how is this going to look as a print, and how are these layers going to look, and what colors am I going for? But that whole experience of making is so different, because the end product is going to be so different. Because I know with each one of these paintings that I do, it is very much about, like, well, how is that glaze going to sit on top of this color, and how are these 2 colors going to interact, and how is that going to activate the final layer that I put on top of this, and at what scale is that going to really, bowl the viewer over, or there's any number of those factors that go into this. Whereas with the digital, especially given what the technology can do, like, my paintbrush isn't going to erase my flubs, and the canvas is never going to save my previous versions as much as, well, it kind of does, but that's a different, more conversation.
We're kind of at the end of the time too, so I just wanted to get out 2 questions from the audience so that they feel a little participating. And this is an open question to the panel. How do you think the experience will inform your work overall in going forward? So having done the show and this idea about your work, do you think it will influence your work and moving forward as a change? It always will, but it's a great question. Thanks. And that was from Ellen Maidman Tanner.
I could say, for me, it's already starting to influence a project that I'm working on. So I had mentioned that I've been using the Photoshop program just to make renderings, and I needed to make renderings for like 15 pieces that are going to be of different sizes. And instead of how I used to do it, which was just kind of cutting up images of paintings into shapes, I started creating the shapes using the tools that I had worked with in the show, stretching and pulling and twisting. And so I have this whole other set of forms that are coming out. And so now I'm actually going to end up trying to recreate those in the physical world through my painting process. And I've never done anything like that before. So, yeah.
I think on a similar note, I'm sort of thinking of taking these stripped down compositions and then painting them analog, so it's a back and forth of, taking something in the digital world and then taking it back. And it's definitely going to give me ideas of how I can use things in the future.
Well, the ease of experimenting with digital is you cannot deny. I mean, as you pointed out, it very often opens up new possibilities for you in terms of what your original art form is. So,
Correct. And I feel like my own work has been integrating this for a long time, and I just go back and forth. 2 years ago, I was working on an exhibition where every night at the end of the day, and these were oil enamel paintings, I would take my camera and shoot a picture and then upload it, and glitch it some more, and to see where I could take the painting or make the next painting.
Mhm.
So I created a whole show, one after another, based on the night before the painting was almost finished. I would shoot a picture of it, then re-glitch it and make new stencils based on that. And so there was this very serial nature to the creation of that whole show.
Stephen, did you want to talk to that question?
I really, I could speculate, but I don't have an answer. I suspect that it will definitely influence the work, but I don't know how yet. I just don't know.
John, did you want to talk to that question?
Oh, no, I'm good. I feel like I've been a big cheerleader for how much it's changed my work. So,
Okay, and then one last question is, can anyone recommend good archival print companies? I think we can do that have experience with their work. And
I can.
Let me guess.
If you're in
The truth is I really, I've been doing this now for 27 years, printing. And I've always kept one thing foremost in my mind, and that's quality. And I do not allow that to slip at all. And I was very lucky to meet 3 other human beings who became my partners, who agreed that the number one thing that we're going to be trying to put forward with our company is the idea of quality. Okay. So,
I will back that up, because we've had a really good experience with 1000 Museums. When we went into it, I wasn't exactly sure what we were going to get in terms of the final product. This referral to 1000 Museums came from another friend of mine, and getting the print in hand, even after Alan told me it was going to be 300-gram paper and archival inks and everything like that. And I work with high-end printers at my day job. I can't afford them. So getting to work with 1000 Museums, having the product in hand, it really was a huge relief and a great, a bit of excitement to see the product there, because it was like, shit, okay, good. The color quality is spot on. The paper is nice and heavy. It's got a good weight to it. It's grabbing the ink nicely. It was much more than I expected, because anybody can print anything. And this was one of the things we tried to be very sensitive to early on, was if people were going to print this on their home computers, who knows if they would have done it on Xerox paper or glossy paper or newsprint, who knows? I mean, there could be some really cool stuff out there made from those experiments. But in terms of, and especially for the artists in this exhibition, the idea of creating an experience, whether it's digital or in the physical form of the print, we all wanted to have a certain amount of control and had an expectation for what that experience is going to be like. And we wanted to make sure that we were giving the viewer, whether in the digital realm or in the physical realm, an experience that met with what we had anticipated in making the work.
Right.
We didn't want it to have some idea of the quality of this thing and then have it turn out to be crap.
Yeah.
It's really a thrill to pull my proof out of the envelope when I got it in the mail. I pulled the proof out and looked at it, and I just thought, we're off to the races, man. This is great. It looks beautiful.
Perfect.
So on that note, off to the races. I really want to thank Alicia and John for really opening up a whole new possibility for Equity Gallery with multiples, and that more to come. This show is really only the beginning of how Equity Gallery is going to get into the print making and print selling. And then I want to thank all the other artists for being here, Amy and Stephen and John, and of course Mac, who did a great job.
Thank you, Mac.
Thank you, Mac.
Right. So a big round of applause for our panelists and for everybody that joined us tonight. Go online, go see the show. It's up till the end of the month. Keep in touch with Alicia and John, because they're going to have a lot to do with how Equity's printmaking enterprise is going to move forward, because that's their little baby. And think about becoming a member of Equity Gallery. I mean, it's an artist-run space for artists to sort of really take all that power back, right? There you go. So thank you so much for your time. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Michael.
All right,
Thank
thanks a
you.
lot.
And
Thank you.
hold the show up on your computer and then on your phone and just notice those differences. It's an interesting experience.
Thank you, everybody, for a
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
Very informative.
Bye.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, Edith. Good to see you.